So here we have a 2021 Dodge Challenger Scat Pack. Now this thing was hit with some Texas hail. And you can see here this hood is badly damaged. This thing was pelted with hail. The hood, the roof, the deck lid, even this quarter panel. The roof of this car looked as bad as the hood. My PBR tech came out and he went ahead and removed most of this hail from this roof. But we have some little areas here. If we get this in the light, you can see where some push marks remain. This roof was pretty bad. In fact, he did a fantastic job on it. So basically he pushed this to paint. We're gonna have to do a few little repairs on this and we're gonna repaint this roof. There's a little ding here that's on the sail panel that broke some paint, so we need to repair that. And a couple little areas on this rail that we need to repair as well. Now the deck lid he did a really nice job on. This just needs to be buffed and polished and it'll be ready to go. He repaired the quarter panel, no issues with the quarter panel or this door, and he also repaired the fenders. You do have to blend these fenders in order to get a good color match from the hood to the fenders. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean this panel. We're going to mark the areas that need to be addressed. So right here, if you see in this light, if I can get that, you can see the push marks. Now that's going to need a little bit of glaze or filler, I believe. So we're going to take a little block. We're going to sand this just to kind of see what needs to be done. Some of those can be taken out in the texture of the clear coat. The minor ones, these are all the ones I marked that I need to look at. Before we go ahead and sand this entire roof, I need to look at all these little spots and see if they need any filler. So I've got some 800 on the DA here, and I'm just going to hit this a little bit with the DA. Holding it flat, and we're going to see. Wow, that pretty much totally removed it. Let's wet this down. I don't know if you guys will be able to see it on camera. So that spot I thought I might have to, it was borderline whether I would have to use any filler. So let's do one of the worst spots. These two spots right here are one of the worst. Okay, so we sanded out one of the worst spots here with some 800. Just held the DA flat and you can see there's still a spot there. That's a low spot. It burned through right there, so that was a little push mark. So we are going to need a little glaze on there. So I'm going to leave this tape on this so I know that we need to put a little glaze there. Now I'm going to go over all these spots. We'll sand each one with the 800 grit sandpaper on the DA, flatten it out, see if it needs any glaze. If it does, I'll leave the tape there. If it doesn't, I'll remove the tape and then we'll go through and apply glaze to these areas.
So you're going to see as I go around, and I'm using a little bit of this USC icing. This is just a polyester glazing putty, but I sand every little spot with a little bit of 180 before I apply that. And then I just DA it out and sand it smooth. Now, it looks like I'm putting a lot of filler on here, but really it's a small amount, and most of it's getting sanded off. So you really can't even see the spots that I filled. And now we're preparing this for primer, so I'm going around all the edges, sanding it with a red scuff pad, and then we're cleaning it with isopropyl alcohol, and then we'll mask off the perimeter to get it ready for primer. And we're going to use the upol 2K primer. I really didn't explain this, but everywhere I'm putting primer has been sanded with 320 grit sandpaper. That's what you want to spray primer over. That's going to give you good adhesion for that primer. Now, outside of those 320 grit scratches, the surrounding areas have all been sanded with 600 or 800 grit sandpaper. But as we block this out, those areas, that overspray is going to be removed when we either DA it with 600 or we block sand it with 320. So we're going to block sand this primer after we're done applying 2 coats of this 2K urethane primer. There's a lot of different types of primer you can use. I would recommend a 2K urethane primer. I would stay away from the lacquer primers. I know they're inexpensive. A 2K is going to catalyze over that surface, and that's just going to give you a better results, and it's more compatible with all base coats. So I would stick to a 2K. What I use is the upol 2K primer. It's 2253, I believe. I'll leave a link in the description. It's a real versatile primer. You can use it as a primer surfacer, a hide build primer, or even a sealer. And it's a tintable sealer. So very versatile product. It sands really well. All of these 2K primers shrink a little bit. There's always some shrinkage. I find it to be pretty minimal after a day or so. And what I typically do is I'll spray my primer on one day and then I'll let it sit overnight. So just before I go home, I'll spray my primer, let it sit overnight, and typically I'm good to go to sand it the next day. We are using the R500 for my spray gun. I'm using a 1.5 tip on that. And as far as the air pressure, I set it about 20 PSI for my air pressure with the fan wide open, and about 2 to 3 turns out from closed on my fluid volume. So I'll close that fluid volume all the way and 2 to 3 turns out. And we'll put 2 coats of 2K primer on this, letting it flash off or cure about 10 to 15 minutes in between coats. There's no real secrets to spraying primer. You want to have a consistent speed and a consistent distance from the panel. You want to overlap your passes about 70%, and you want to lay it on as smooth as possible. Now, all this is going to be block sanded and DA sanded, so we are going to smooth it out, but to save a little time, you want to lay it on there as smooth as possible. Off camera, Darius and I went ahead and block sanded out this roof, got it nice and smooth and ready for paint. We were just looking for any high or low areas. We removed those. Darius went ahead and prepped out the quarter panels. We sanded that with the orbital sander and 600 grit sandpaper, but we stayed away from the body lines and the edges, and we hand sanded those with a gray scuff pad. You don't want to get any burn throughs in areas that you don't want to put paint, and a DA can burn through a body line or an edge very easily. Preparation is the most important thing when you're painting your vehicle, and getting good adhesion is a key component of that. So you want to make sure all the edges are sanded properly, should have no shiny areas. All that shine should be knocked off. As far as your primer goes, we sanded this and blocked this with 320, and then we went back over the primer with 600 grit sandpaper to get a fine scratch so we can cover it in our base coat. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about masking today, but if you want me to make a video solely on masking off your vehicle, let me know down in the comments below. We got it all masked off. Darius is wiping this down with isopropyl alcohol. You can use isopropyl alcohol, you can use wax and grease remover, you could use a water-based cleaner, or all three. So we're going to wipe it down with ISO right before we paint it. Make sure all that dust has been removed, all those contaminants have been removed, and then we're ready to paint. Today we'll be spraying with this Porpoise PRD 627. This is a medium pressure paint gun, so it's an MP with a split tip. Very nice gun, sprays beautiful.
So in order to get a nice smooth sealer, you want to set your gun appropriately. Now, these are just guidelines to gun settings. They always change depending on the temperature. It's really hot today. It's going to be 100 degrees today. It's early in the morning, so we're trying to paint this when it's cool. But you want to set up your gun according to the gun you're using, the materials you're using, and the temperature. And there's a lot of other different variables as well. So this is just a guideline. We're going to open our fan pattern up wide open. We're going to have our fluid volume 2.5 turns out from close. So we close it all the way and then 2.5 turns out. And the air pressure is going to be right around between 20 and 24 PSI, somewhere in there. This gun, I don't have to give it as much air from the compressor. I think around 20 PSI is going to be sufficient, but we'll see. There's 20 right there. I'm going to narrow the fan pattern back just a little bit because it's pretty wide. This gun has a wide fan pattern. I'm not going to pull the trigger all the way either because I just want to get this covered with sealer. And then what we're going to do is we're going to base this in just black, and then we'll put the gunmetal gray on it.
So this is upol sealer. This is that 2253 that I was telling you about. And the way you mix this for sealer is you do 4 parts primer, 1 part of the activator, and then 2 parts urethane reducer. And this particular primer you can use as a sealer that way. Now, not all primers you can use as a sealer. So if you're going to try this, you want to make sure you're using a primer that can be used as a sealer. Sealer and primer are not the exact same thing. Some primers cannot be used as a sealer, just so you know. The general purpose of a sealer is to create a barrier between the base coat and the primer. You get fine scratches in primer, this sealer is going to kind of fill those fine scratches, and it's going to keep that base coat from soaking into that primer. The goal when I'm spraying sealer is I want to lay it down as smooth as possible. So I want to apply it medium wet. The smoother you lay down your sealer, the smoother your base coat's going to be, and that's going to allow you to lay down a really nice, smooth clear coat. Now, you want to overlap about 80%, so you want to have a nice uniform finish. You want to keep your speed and your distance consistent with the panel. I'm not concerned about covering the entire roof. I want to get those primer areas covered. Now you want to let that sealer flash off for about 10 to 15 minutes before you start applying your base, but we've got our base mixed up now. This is actually just a straight black. We're just doing this as like a ground coat, and then we'll put on the right color, which is that gunmetal gray. As far as the gun settings for base coat, they're same as sealer. We're using the same gun, we're using the same gun settings. No need to change, it's working perfectly. Sealer and base coat are really the same consistency, so we don't have to adjust our gun. Now, if you go to a different gun, if you're using a different gun for sealer and a different gun for base coat, then you may need to adjust your gun settings. Now to get down with this gunmetal gray, this is a really excellent looking color. You'll see it at the end when we look over this vehicle, but beautiful color. But it can be a little bit tricky if you're not careful. You want to make sure with these high metallic finishes that you're overlapping your passes about 80%. You want a good overlap because that's going to give you a consistent metallic finish. It's going to help eliminate any of that mottling or that blotchy effect that you might see in some paint jobs. Right now, I'm just putting a coat over to get the black covered, so I'm not real concerned about making it perfect. And it's really hot today, so what you're going to notice is this paint is drying really quickly. I don't even have time to make a pass and come back before it's starting to dry. Now that can certainly make it tricky, but I'm going to show you a way to correct that when we spray our last coat. On my second coat here, I'm going to make sure it's a medium to heavy coat. I'm putting it on pretty wet. I want to make sure I'm overlapping. I want to make sure I have consistent speed and consistent distance from the panel. All that will help lay down a uniform metallic finish. This is where I'm really starting the second coat, and I'm putting it on quite heavy because of the temperature and because I don't want any streaking. I want that nice uniform metallic finish. This video was shot back in summer, and yes, I am using slow reducer. So this is why it's important to use the right reducer or materials for the temperature you're spraying in, because even with a slow reducer, it was drying very quickly. And the same goes for clear coat. So in these hot temperatures, this is how I'm going to correct any mottling or tiger stripes I might have. So after I put that heavy coat on real wet, I come back immediately and I put a drop coat on. So basically what I'm doing is I'm a little bit farther away from the panel and I'm spraying in all different directions, and you can see how I'm dust coating it on there. And this is going to eliminate those tiger stripes or mottling or any oddities in that metallic finish. It's going to make it nice and uniform, silky smooth, so we can lay down a clear coat and have the best results possible. Finishing up the drop coat, let's talk about the clear coat I'm going to be using today. It's the Sherwin-Williams FC710. That's a spot panel clear coat. Probably not perfect for these conditions, but I'm used to it. I know how to spray it. I'll share some adjustments I make when spraying in this heat. Remember, these product links can be found in the description of this video.
We're going full fluid volume, setting my air pressure at about 28 psi.
With this heat, there's no need for a tack coat. I'm going to start spraying this heavy and slow. Everything is hot, the car, the clear coat. I'm going to spray it on slow and heavy. I'm going to spray the first coat exactly how I want it to look, and I'm going to hammer on the second coat the same way. It's almost impossible to run clear coat in this heat, and as you can see, I'm moving slow. This gun is not this slow. Because of the temperature, it's just the way I have to spray. And don't forget about overlapping your passes. Overlapping your passes is one of the keys to getting a really slick finish. If you want that glass-like finish, you need to overlap your passes about 70 to 80%. This basically doubles up the clear coat on those edges, and it really slicks it out. A lot of beginners, this is something they struggle with because they feel like they've already cleared that area, and if they go over it again, they might run it or something of that nature. You're building on what you've already laid down, and you're just going to help it to slick out. I really have to mention how well this paint gun sprays. This is the Porpoise PRD 627, and it has a split tip. Iwata has a split tip, and it's going to create a finer atomization. This gun really sprays fantastic, and this is not an expensive gun. I think this gun runs, last time I checked, is around $220. So if you guys are looking for a beginner gun, because I think this would be good for a beginner. It's very easy to use. It's very easy to set up and get a nice finish. You definitely want to check this one out. And if I can, I will leave a link in the description. I'm not sure if it's available on Amazon, but I'll also leave their website if it's not available on Amazon, and you can check them out. By the way, the tip size on this gun is a 1.3. We use the 1.3 for sealer, base, and clear coat. We have a few minutes left in this video. I'm going to go ahead and answer some of your viewer questions. I think I might start doing this at the end of each video, answering some questions that I get asked quite a bit. If you have a question, leave it in the comments below. If I don't answer it, then I'll answer it in one of my videos. I may possibly make a full video where I'm just answering your questions. Let me know your thoughts on that down in the comments. Here's a question. When do you use sealer and when do you use primer? Primer is used when you're going over a body repair. So when you're going over body work or any breakthroughs in your paint down to bare metal, you want to use a direct to metal primer. Sealer is only used just before you spray base. You want to either cover your primer or just create a barrier between your paint and your base coat. Another question, what's the difference between a high build primer and a primer surfacer? High build primer is just a thicker product. It's just a thick primer, and what it's going to do is it's going to help fill some low areas. It's really made so you can block it out and level out your repair. A surfacer is not as thick, it's thin, and you're just basically sealing it with primer. You can block it. If you take time to finish your bodywork really well, a primer surfacer is all you need, because then you can block it a couple times quickly, run over it with 600 and paint it. Okay, here's a question I get asked a lot, and it's about preparing your primer for paint. He says, what kind of sandpaper should I use when I'm preparing my primer for paint? Now that's a tricky question because I finish my body work, so it's pretty much straight. So I just use a primer surfacer, and then I block sand it with 320, and then I'll hit it with 600 before I apply my base and my clear coat. So if you're a beginner and your bodywork isn't exactly perfect, it's got a few waves in it, you're going to want to use a high build primer. If that's the case, you can block it with 180 or 220 to get it straight, and then you want to refine those scratches with 320 and then go over it with 600 before you apply your base. Now, in between the 180 and the 220 blocking there, you may break through into your body filler, so you may have to apply another coat of primer before you hit it with 320 and then hit it with 600 and then base it. Here's a question I get a lot from DIYers. What happens if I spray my first coat of clear and I have to step out? Can I come back the next day and put the second coat on? No, you cannot. You must resand that clear coat if you want to put another coat on, because you've lost your window where you can reapply clear coat. You can't put your second coat on, hours after. Do not do that. That will cause issues. Now, base coat, some base coats have like a 24-hour window or a 12-hour window. I've never waited that long, but I know painters who have waited overnight and sprayed clear coat on. Personally, I wouldn't do it. I like to spray my clear coat on within an hour or so at the most. I always get questions about compressor size. What's the smallest compressor I can use to spray a car or paint my vehicle? If you're doing an overall paint job, you're going to need at least a 30-gallon compressor, in my opinion. Something that produces around 9 to 10 CFM at 30 PSI. And you can get those at Harbor Freight. I have one. I purchased one. I have a couple videos that show me painting with it. Now, I'm not painting an entire vehicle. I'm spot painting a few panels, and it worked out perfectly. And you want to use a low volume, low pressure paint gun. That's the AeroPro A610, the Inokraft Drizzle D1, the original R500. Eastwood has one. It's the LT100, I think. They're all basically the same gun. And in fact, the R500 and the LT100 are the exact same gun, rebranded. Same with the AeroPro and the Inokraft. There's also the YT160. Those are all three of those guns are the same guns. Same manufacturer, just packaged differently. If you're trying to get by with like a pan pancake compressor or something really small, it's just probably not going to work really well. I can't say for sure, but it's just not, unless you're using like a airbrush or a touch-up gun, possibly. You might be able to do like one panel with a touch-up gun and a pancake compressor. I've never tried it, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend at least a 30-gallon that produces around 9 CFMs at 30 PSI. I have reviews on all those guns on my channel. I also have detailed explanation of how to prep your car out for paint, along with exactly how to work with body filler and how to get a straight panel. So if you want, check those out, check out the channel, and definitely subscribe. Okay, here's a quick look at the finished product, and it came out beautifully. Very happy with how it turned out. If you found this information helpful, definitely like this video and subscribe to the channel. I appreciate each and every one of you watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of Garage Noise.